I am in year 6 at Gateway Seminary. I go to Jacob's Church, and I've been there for about the same amount of time, about 6 years, so 6.5, something like that. I work over at U Medical as a fatherhood director, so I talk with dads as they come through with their girlfriends or wives for pregnancy tests. That's my day job, day in, day out. So Jacob being on vacation, he asked me to come and fill in for him. So I've got his PowerPoints, and yeah, we'll start walking through. Is that good? Cool. So Old Testament intro. Have you guys walked through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, all that, right? Can you guys remind me of what Genesis is all about? What do we see when we get to Genesis? Pop quiz.
You see the fall of man take place.
Yeah.
And then you have Abraham.
Yeah.
In that covenant with God. Basically becoming the father to many people. How he has to leave his family and go to somewhere far yonder. And then his nephew's like, no, dude, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, so we see the creation. We see God instituting a way for mankind to be saved. He starts the process of creating Israel way before we ever meet Israel, right? So what happens in Exodus?
Oh, boy. The Israelites get mixed up with bad apples and they become slaves. 400 years.
Dude, I love that. Yeah. So they get mixed up. They're slaves for 400 years. And what happens after they become slaves?
Well, like Moses comes into the picture. Or
Yeah.
you mean something else before that? I don't know. So 400 years Moses, and then they wander for a really long time.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so Moses comes on the scene. God calls him through the burning bush, and we see him, on God's command, lead the nation of Israel out of captivity, right? You've got the 10 plagues, and you see that God is sovereign over the most powerful king in the entire world, right? It's pretty miraculous. The Israelites leave, they go to a mountain, they get the 10 commandments, they have this moment with God, right? What's Leviticus all about? Book of Laws. Isn't it exciting reading? Yeah, so Leviticus, it's how do you approach a holy God, right? God gives them instructions on how you're supposed to do this. Numbers, what happens in Numbers?
It's like almost like a documentation of all the numbers of families and tribes.
Yeah, that's how it starts, right? There's a whole bunch of numbers and tribes and who's in what tribe and how do we do all this stuff, right? But it's a documentation of them wandering, right? They go to the promised land, they grumble, they complain, they don't act in faith according to what God says, and they say, let's go back to Egypt, let's rebel. And God says, okay, this entire generation is going to wander the desert till they die, right? It's pretty big stuff. So they wander the desert till they die. And the reason I'm asking all of these books is, one, it's good for a pop quiz, and two, it's because it instructs this, right? So the plains of Moab is what this is. This is where, right before they cross the Jordan River, Moses sets up camp with all of Israel. And he says, all right, guys, round 2, right? The entire first generation has died off. I'm going to die, and you're going to enter the promised land. And so for you, the new generation, here is how you should act. Remember, right? So this geography, remember, this geography is important. It sets the scene. So before they cross the river, Moses is going to give some sermons. So Deuteronomy. The purpose of Deuteronomy is first to remind Israel about God's faithfulness. To remind Israel about God's faithfulness. We'll talk more about that here in just a minute. The second thing is to reveal God's laws as an expression of his love for them. You guys have your Bibles? Yeah? Okay. So why is God's law an expression of love?
Unlike the other gods who just kind of gods throughout history where they were unpredictable, they struck them down and killed them for no apparent reason.
Yeah.
God was gracious to show them exactly what they needed to do, what his desires were for them.
That's exactly it. Yeah. This God did not leave them wondering about how they were to interact with him. He wasn't fickle like the other gods in the ancient Near East, right? He took a personal interest in Israel. So if you have your Bibles, turn to Deuteronomy 6. I think. Nope, that's not it. Okay, never mind. I can't find it. I was going to point something out, but the third thing is to motivate the people of Israel to love God through consistent obedience. And the fourth thing is to show Israel that obedience to God demonstrates love for him. So, four purposes of Deuteronomy. Ultimately, Deuteronomy was written to remind Israel of God's faithfulness and love for them so that they would be motivated to love and show their love towards him through their obedience. So it was written to remind and it was written to motivate. Okay, so I'll give you a chance to finish jotting it down. You got it?
Oh, I'm on.
All right, go for it. You got it?
I'm just going to take a picture of one.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. All right, so I'm going to stop this. All right. So, this idea of remembrance is huge in Deuteronomy. So, this is a word study of the Old Testament. All right, we're looking at the word remember. We see that in Genesis, there's a few instances. But who's doing the remembering most of the time? Genesis 8:1, God remembered Noah. Genesis 9:15, I will remember my covenant. Genesis 9:16, when the bow is in the cloud, then I will look upon it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. Right? As we continue through, we see that people like the cupbearer remembered, Joseph remembered. Exodus, there's a few instances where the Israelites are being called to remember. Leviticus, there's a couple. I will remember, I will remember. Again, God's doing the remembering. Numbers, there's a couple. We remember often unfaithfulness. But then you get to Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy has 15 instances of remember. It's remember, 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 all over the place. So let's turn to Deuteronomy 4:10. If you have your Bible with you. Okay, we're going to actually start at 9. So 4:9, only give heed to yourself and keep your soul diligently, so that you do not forget the things which your eyes have seen, and they do not depart from your heart all the days of your life, but make them known to your sons and your grandsons. Remember the day you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, when the Lord said to me, assemble the people to me, that I may let them hear my words, so that they may learn to fear me all the days they live on the earth, and that they may teach their children. Deuteronomy 5:15. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there by a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. So what is he trying to get them to remember? God's faithfulness. Absolutely. So he rescued them from Egypt, he took them to the mountain, and he gave them the law. Then, after they rebelled, instead of wiping them all out, he led them through the wilderness, sustaining them every single day. Right? We like reading Numbers a lot of times more than we like reading Leviticus and Deuteronomy because of the stories. Right? They had quail piled to here, surrounding their entire camp. It's crazy, right? People were swallowed up by chasms in the earth. Those stories are really cool. But here, they're supposed to remember God's power, his faithfulness, his love for them, his mercy for them, over and over and over again. Deuteronomy 7:18, you shall not be afraid of them. You shall remember well what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and all Egypt. 8:2, you shall remember all the way the Lord your God has led you into the wilderness these 40 years, that he might humble you, testing you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. But you shall remember the Lord, for it is he who is giving you power to make wealth, that he may confirm his covenant which he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. So who's doing the remembering here? The Israelites. Remember, remember, remember. Over and over and over again. All throughout Deuteronomy. Even towards the end, Deuteronomy 25:17, remember what Amalek did to you along the way. When you came out of Egypt, you remember that event because it points to something in your history that should remind you about me. Remember the days of old. 15 times. Remember, remember, remember. So when you think of Deuteronomy, think of this, right? Because a lot of this isn't new to the Israelites. The law, right? It's an unpacking for a new generation, but it's look back, look back, look back. Remember who I am because you're going forward into a new thing, right? Any questions? No. Okay. Remember that. So 4 purposes: to remind Israel about God's faithfulness, to reveal God's laws as an expression of his love for them, to motivate the people of Israel to love God through obedience, and to show Israel that obedience to God demonstrates love for him. So we're going to see 3 sermons, right? They're camped out on the plains of Moab, and Moses is going to speak to them 3 times, right? That's how Deuteronomy is kind of broken up. So the first one, we see a review of God's redemptive work, right? Moses goes through and says, look back, Remember these times, these things that I did for you. The second sermon is an exposition of the Decalogue. Who remembers what the Decalogue is? It's the 10 Commandments.
Oh.
Okay, Deca, 10 Commandments. Exposition is an unpacking of, right? So the law piece of this, do this, don't do that. This is how you interact. Those things are all going to come back to one of the 10 Commandments. He is unpacking what the 10 Commandments mean to them in their day-to-day lives. That's the part we hate reading often, right? But it's a beautiful picture of God's instruction to a people to give them an idea of how to interact with him. And lastly, we'll talk about the third sermon later. Okay, so within this, we get warnings. Okay, they get stronger towards the end of the book, but we get warnings. So, Deuteronomy 4:19. Let's read that real quick. 4:19. And beware not to lift up your eyes to heaven and see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the hosts of heaven, and be drawn away and worship them and serve them, those which the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples under the whole heaven. Verse 20, but the Lord has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace from Egypt to be a people for his own possession as today. Right, so what's the warning?
Can you read that again?
Yeah. And beware not to lift up your eyes to the heaven and see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the hosts of heaven, and be drawn away and worship them and serve them, those which the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples under the whole heaven. But the Lord has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace from Egypt to be a people for his own possession as today. What's the warning? What are they to be aware of? Beware. Yeah. Yeah, don't worship creation. Don't look to the stars. Don't look to the moon and worship them. God created them, and you are his. Right? Next one. Deuteronomy 8:11. Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his ordinances and his statutes which I am commanding you today. What's the warning? Don't forget. Right? Don't forget. Again, that idea of remembering. Don't forget the commandments that I have given you. Don't forget who I am. Right? We see it a lot in Deuteronomy. Teach your kids to teach their kids to teach their kids. Don't forget. Deuteronomy 11:16. Beware that your hearts are not deceived, and that you do not turn away and serve other gods and worship them. What's the warning? Yeah, don't turn away. Don't be deceived. Right? Beware that your hearts are not deceived. And lastly, last one. 12:30. Beware that you are not ensnared to follow them. Let's start at 29. When the Lord your God cuts off before you the nations which you are going to dispossess, and you dispossess them, and dwell in their land. So once you conquer the promised land, beware that you are not ensnared to follow them after they are destroyed before you, and that you do not inquire after their gods, saying, how do these nations serve their gods, that I also may do likewise? What's the warning? What are they to be aware of?
Not to follow in, like, pagan practices or worship.
Yeah. So you're walking into a land that doesn't know God. They've got other gods that they're worshiping, right? So don't become ensnared by their practices, right? So don't forget. Don't turn away. Don't be deceived. Don't worship creation. Don't be ensnared by these other gods. Right? There's a very common theme. There's a strong warning in Deuteronomy as they're walking through. Beware. Don't forget. Remember, remember, remember. Right? Okay. So if that appears on a quiz, you guys should know that. All right. Deuteronomy chapter 5 through 6, restatement of the Ten Commandments. Deuteronomy 6:4. This is one of the most famous passages out of all of Deuteronomy. Maybe not 6:4, but the whole thing. We're going to read a little more. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. So pretty much all the time, right? That's the idea there. 8, you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead. You shall write them on your doorposts of your house and on your gates. Why would you write something on your house or on your gate? Or tie something to your hand? Why would you do that? To remember. Good. Yes, they are supposed to do these things so that they remember, so that their kids can ask about it, so that they are sparked to memory all the time. When you wake up, when you lay down for bed, when you go out, when you come in, you're supposed to remember. Right? This is called the Shema, the Hear, O Israel. The Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Right? That is one of the most famous parts of Deuteronomy. We hear that all the time, like in Christian circles, right? Teach them to your kids so that they will remember. They are supposed to remember everything that God's done. And I know I'm really hammering on that, right? It's because it's an important piece of the book. If you remember one thing about Deuteronomy, this is 1 out of 3. I'll give you guys 2 more later. Doing pretty good on time. Okay. So, Deuteronomy, it unpacks the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments. So, we're going to see divine authority, Deuteronomy 6 through 11. The call is, have no other gods before me. Right? Here is a passage from there. It is not for your righteousness or for the uprightness of your heart that you are going to possess their land, but it is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord your God is driving them out before you, in order to confirm the oath which the Lord swore to you, to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Know then, it is not because of your righteousness that the Lord your God is giving you this good land to possess, for you are a stubborn people. Ew. You don't want to hear that in a sermon, right? Can you imagine sitting there on Sunday morning and being like, y'all are stubborn? And it's only because of God's grace that you're even sitting here? But that is the reality of things, right? Even today, we as humans are found to be stubborn. But the nation of Israel, walking through the wilderness, responding to God, they had been proven to be stubborn. They knew what he was talking about here, right? So have no other gods before me. Remember, don't forsake. It's not for your benefit. It's not because you were so cool that God saved you. It's because you're mine, even though you're stubborn, right? Despite your stubbornness. So, we see the divine authority. No other gods before me. Divine dignity. Deuteronomy 12. You shall not make for yourself an idol. Let's turn to 12 real quick. These are the statutes, 12:1. These are the statutes and judgments which you shall carefully observe in the land which the Lord, the God of your fathers has given you to possess as long as you live on the earth. You shall utterly destroy all the places where the nations whom you dispossess serve their gods, on the high mountains and on the hills and under every green tree. You shall tear down their altars and smash their sacred pillars and burn their Asherim with fire, and you shall cut down the engraved images of their gods, and you shall obliterate their names from that place. You shall not make for yourself an idol. You shall not have any other gods before me. That's pretty intense, though, right? That's a pretty intense command, to go where these other people worshipped and smash up their holy things, eliminating these other gods from those places. That's pretty intense, right? God took this commandment stuff seriously. Now, why do you think God was cared about that? Yeah, that's a huge piece. And he's God, right? He's the one true God. And Israel was to function as a kingdom of priests. They were to teach the world around them how to serve God, who God was, by the way that they lived, right? And these other gods existing in these places would only confuse everybody, right? They were false gods. They had no power. Now, the cool thing about the book of Deuteronomy is that understanding Deuteronomy will shape the way that you read the entire rest of the Bible. You will see this language built into the Kings time after time after time. You will see it built into Judges time after time after time, right? When Israel rejects God, what do? They build Asherah poles. They go to the high places and they worship other gods, right? Gideon, what does he cut down when God first comes and talks to him? An Asherah pole, right? He goes and he chops down the tree and he puts it in logs and sacrifices an ox and burns the pole like he makes the pole into a sacrifice to God, right? And gets him in a lot of trouble. But time after time after time, Israel forgets these words. They forget. Commitment to dignity. Don't misuse the name of God. Rights and privileges of deity. Observe him and keep it holy. So let's turn to 14:22. These are everybody's favorite, by the way. Verse 14. Clean and unclean animals shall not eat any detestable thing. This is what you can eat. This is what you can't eat. Tithe. You shall surely tithe all the produce from what you sow, which comes out of the field every year. You shall eat in the presence of the Lord your God at the place where he chooses to establish his name. The tithe, your grain, your new wine, your oil, your firstborn of your herd, your flock, so that you may learn. There was a purpose, so that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. Right? Even these laws are to help them remember. Human authority. Honor your father and mother. Right? These are some of the more interesting ones. The feasts. This is how you handle justice. I'm kind of going through these quickly because I want to make sure that we have time at the end for the last bit. Okay, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal. Human dignity is found in here. Cities of refuge. Were you guys supposed to read Deuteronomy? Yeah? Okay. So what are the cities of refuge?
Murder accidentally or kill someone. Could flee to that city and the Levites protection, I guess.
Yeah.
I can't remember if it was just if it was an accident or could they flee if they meant to as well.
Let's see. So verse 4. Now, this is the case of the manslayer who may flee there and live when he kills his friend unintentionally, not hating him previously, as when a man goes into the forest with his friend to cut wood, and his hand swings the axe to cut down the tree, and iron head slips off the handle and strikes his friend so that he dies. Oops. He may flee to one of these cities and live. Right? So, it is for unintentional, manslaughter kind of stuff. But they make provision because vengeance was a real thing in the ancient Near East, right? You kill someone by accident, and their family's coming to get you, right? Or they're trying to try you, pursue you, and so they establish these places where, okay, we recognize that was an accident, but we also recognize you can't live in the same place you lived, right? You got to get out, and so they're making provisions for human dignity, kind of, right? Human dignity. A lot of these things are concerned with that. So these commands: you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal. How are those unpacked in day-to-day life? How should you act as a holy people, as God's people? Okay, there's a commitment to humankind, no false testimony, and then human rights and privileges. Don't covet. So let's turn to 24 verse 1. When a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of the house. And she leaves his house and goes and becomes another man's wife. And if the latter husband turns against her and writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, or the latter husband dies who took her to be his wife, then her former husband who sent her away is not allowed to take her again to be his wife, since she has been defiled, for that is an abomination before the Lord. You shall not bring sin on the land which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance. Yikes. That's a very specific command, right? The reason I point that one out, right? So don't covet. It's something about adultery, right? Marriage, remarriage, divorce. Where do we read something like that in the New Testament?
Well, I don't know. The Pharisees asked, if
Yeah.
a woman married, whose wife would she be in heaven? That one.
Yeah, so that was the Sadducees. They say, okay, when she dies, or she has 7 husbands, when they all die, whose wife is she going to be? The Pharisees also ask specifically about the certificate of divorce, right? Marriage and remarriage. So again, Deuteronomy forms the background of everything else that we read, right? So this is the last book of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books. I think it's really important that as people who love Jesus, people who love God, we fall in love with His Word, and that includes Deuteronomy, right? And so the reason I say that is because often we get into this habit of saying, oh, Deuteronomy, so boring, right? No, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing to open God's Word and to see how He instructed the Israelites, because it informs us. It sets the stage for us to recognize who Jesus is. Who is supposed to keep Israelites on track with this?
Deuteronomy?
In Deuteronomy, throughout history,